We are letting folks in now.
Okay.
You may start when ready.
Okay, I'll just give it a, okay. All right, I am calling to order the regular bi-monthly meeting of the Marin Water Board of Directors for July 20th, 2021. And our first order of business is to call the roll.
Director Bregman,
Here.
Director Gibson,
Here.
Director Russell,
Here.
Director Schmidt,
Here.
and President Kohler.
I'm here. I now am looking for a motion to adopt the agenda.
Moved.
Second.
Do we have any public comment on adoption of the agenda, Terry?
We do not.
Then we need a roll call.
Director Bregman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Kohler.
Aye. Now is the time for public comment on any item that is not on the agenda. And I'll just remind everybody that we do have an item on drought on the agenda. So if that is your item, please wait till then. But if you have items that are not on the agenda, now is the time.
There are none. Oh,
Okay.
sorry. Someone just raised their hand. Phone number 1402. Go ahead. Go ahead.
James Holmes, Larkspur. A month or so ago, I participated in a staff-led hearing on future recreation planning, and it was very well conducted by the staff and the youth advocates. But I was, of all the commenters, I was the only one who commented on the possibility of financial constraints on recreation and recreation planning. It also seemed like some of the recreation advocates were unclear on the principal mission of the district, because they urged the district to look to other agencies whose primary mission was recreation or something other than water production. Also unclear is how many of the recreation advocates were ratepayers. In any event, it seems to me that probably many of the recreation constituents do not understand the district's financial situation or its primary mission. And for the district's part, I believe that they probably should not undertake ambitious plans for expanded recreation that could add costs to ratepayers' burden at a time of unprecedented future costs simply to acquire more water. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that comment. Do we have any other public comments on items that are not agendized today?
There are no further comments.
Okay, then we now reach the time for director and general managers announcements. Ben, do you have anything? Looks like you're muted, but I'm seeing no. Okay, other board members, any announcements?
Not from me.
Nope, not me.
Larry?
Nope.
Nobody? Then I'll just say quickly, I had the opportunity today, I was invited to present at the U.S. Water Alliance's One Water Leader Council meeting. So that's utilities from all over the country, specifically on Marin's drought situation and how we were responding in a manner that is climate resilient. So I think it went very well. And I just wanted to thank staff for providing me with slides and a few statistics. And you may be hearing from many water utilities all over the country. They were all very impressed with everything we're doing. So with that, I will bring us to the consent calendar. Do we have a motion to adopt?
Move approval.
Moved.
Second.
Great. Do we have any public comment on the consent calendar, Terry?
There are none.
Then we need a roll call.
Director Bregman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Kohler.
Aye. So that brings us to the drought update. And then for the benefit of the public, the way this will work is that we're first going to have the update, and then I will open the public hearing on the potential adoption of ordinance 453. So with that, I will turn it over to staff to make the presentation.
Thank you. Lucy Croy, Water Quality Manager. I'm going to bring up my screen. Get this going. Okay, there we go. So tonight we're going to give an update on the efforts surrounding the drought response. So we'll start off first with an update on water supply conditions and water use in a service area. Then we'll move into an update building off the discussion last Friday at the Operations Committee meeting with the updates on drought activities and outreach and communications, an update on conservation efforts, as well as an update on the emergency drought projects. So starting off with water supply and water use, an update through the middle of July now. We're over here now on the left-hand side of the screen, and going into the middle of July, our total reservoir storage in the district system is just above 33,500 acre feet. This is just above 42% of our total capacity as of the end of this month. And that's, still as we've spoken about in the last few months, this is really the lowest we've seen at the current capacity, the current total capacity of the reservoir system since we increased the capacity of Kent Lake and added Suluhuli to the reservoir system. It's still a bit above the storage levels that we had in the 1976-77 drought, and those water supply projects were part of that response. The lowest we got there was just above 11,000 acre feet. So moving into an update on water use in the system. Since the beginning of May, we've remained pretty steady at around 23 million gallons per day. As you can see, this flat line across, which is, a considerable effort on our customers, given that going into the summer months, we typically see our demand double following this orange line, the baseline that we see. It typically doubles going into peak irrigation. So it's quite a bit of savings right there that we've seen, but dropping down closer to the 40% would be ideal. And moving into the fall, winter months, it gets a bit harder to see water savings as water use transitions to mostly indoor use.
Lucy, can I just interrupt you for 1 second? Can you just go back to that slide for a second?
Yeah.
I just want to make the point. So when you say it would be, we're the 40% is represented by that green dotted line, right?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that we were all clear on that. Thank you.
Yes. So then moving into our projected reservoir storage, you've seen this chart quite a bit. On the left-hand side is our actual reservoir storage over the past few months, and then transitioning into our projections with the dashed lines. So looking at about 25% of average rainfall would be at this lower end, all the way up to average rainfall is the dashed green line. And then there's two more lines that we've added on for this meeting, which are the solid lines you see here. And these show the pretty considerable impact that conservation savings, the 40% conservation savings would have on our total reservoir storage over the coming months. So we've added that to kind of see, what kind of impact that would have and where that would take us. So moving into at the end of next rainy season, so at the end of May next year, we would be just around 60,000 acre feet as a point of interest. So now moving into an update on drought activities and outreach. First off is just a quick update on some of our water supply initiatives. And first and foremost is our conservation outreach and efforts underway. And both Jeannie and Carrie will be giving more detailed updates on that. But within our water supply reservoir system, we are expanding how much we take from each reservoir. So we've been using Suluhuli over the past few months, and at this point have now used around just over 1,000 acre feet of Suluhuli reservoir, moving that into Nicasio. And then also are working towards opening up a residential recycled water fill station by the end of this month. We're targeting and are still working. It's fully constructed. This image over here on the left is showing what each site will look like. There'll be hose bibs coming off each one. But we're still working through the last bits of the permitting and have been told that hopefully by the end of this month, we'll be good to go. So at this point, I'm now going to hand it off to Jeannie and she'll give an update on our outreach.
Jeannie, we can't hear you. You're on mute.
Muted.
Well, hello, sorry. So what you see here is a snapshot of our presentations, and we are almost up to 50 at this point. And on the right, you can see some of the more recently completed ones. And on the left, some of the upcoming presentations. So we have started circling back with some organizations, businesses, and homeowners groups that we presented to early on in March. And we want to come back to make sure they are aware of the new restrictions and just to answer any questions they might have and to underscore the importance of conservation. So we're making the second round with many of these organizations. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just take a little bit of time to tell you how we are getting the word out on the newest irrigation restrictions. So we have a new mailer that was completed on Wednesday, the day after the board meeting, and we were able to get it to the printer and get it in production by Thursday. So that's great. I just heard that it has started going out today. The mailers take a little longer because it's standard mail, but we wanted to make sure that we reach everybody, not just people who get the bills, but also renters and other businesses who may not be actual recipients of that correspondence. So our goal is to reach over 100,000 people through this mailer, and that should be hitting people's mailboxes this week. We also did a digital media push out, and that included social media, of course, across all channels. You're going to see us continue to do that over the next few weeks. We really want to make sure people understand the restrictions and know what their watering days are. So what you see there is actually a copy of the mailer. We are also working on the website. We've redid the front page so that it's easy to get to the restrictions. I just took a quick look before the meeting and we're up to about 20,000 page views. And that would be the views just for the landing page, the water rules page within this past week. We wanted to see what kind of traction we were getting to make sure that if we weren't seeing the kind of numbers we wanted to see, that we would refine the message as we go. We also issued a Marin Water e-news e-blast or e-newsletter, and that goes to about 23,000 recipients. And our open rate was about 41%, which is much above the industry average. So we're really pleased with that. Next slide, please. We also began running targeted ads. And what you see on the right is an ad that started running in the Marin IJ this Sunday. We're going to do it 3 times a week for the next 2 weeks to make sure that we get the right level of saturation there. We are also running ads in community newspapers and weekly newspapers as well. We just want to make sure that we capture a broad audience there. And again, with the presentations and events, we're using that really as an opportunity for Q&A and for greater engagement to answer any questions people might have about the restrictions, and more importantly, the importance of conservation now as we are in the summer months. Media outreach is also a big piece of getting the new word out. And we've issued news releases. I followed up with some calls, and so far in the past week, we've had 23 stories on the new irrigation rules in print, broadcast, and radio, as well as online. I wanted to just touch a little bit on our youth outreach. So what you see there is a new coloring sheet that we developed for kids who visit the watershed. And that's basically Hydro, superhero, saying save water. On the back of that sheet is a word find and just some fun facts about how to save water. that's just part of the materials that we're providing for kids. We also are using the TAM van to get the word out. And that picture there shows just one of the presentations where they really do share our conservation and drought information as well. It's all age appropriate. We want to make sure that we're providing the right information for the kids and for their families as well. So that's not just a youth program there. We're also reaching out to recreational camps and the other programs which are really popular in the summer to make sure that we provide all the educational materials we can. And of course, we're developing our school program materials as we move into the fall. And here's just a quick look at our new signs. So we ordered some new yard signs. We distributed all the ones that we had. So that's more than 700 already got the door. We ordered several hundred more. The one on the left is our basic yard sign, asking people to save water. And the one is what we plan to distribute to our recycled water users. The timing is really perfect for that one as we get ready for our new recycled water filling station. And finally, the banner. We've changed some banners, and what you see here is the banner that is now on our roof. It's fairly large. It's 25 feet long and about 6 feet wide, and you can see it from the freeway. So if you're driving by, you might take a look at that. And now I'm going to turn it over to Carrie for her conservation update.
Thank you, Jeannie. Good evening, board. So just a few short days ago, you can advance, Lucy. Just a few short days ago, we took a deep dive into each of these specific incentive programs. And so just in the interest of time and acknowledging that we've kind of looked at them in greater detail fairly recently, I wanted to just take the time this evening to talk about how we're doing as far as July participation relative to the monthly targets that had been presented just last Friday. So you could see our turf replacement program, which is really our biggest push. We're already seeing 50,000 square feet of lawn that have been removed or have been which are no longer being irrigated through just yesterday. So while we're not achieving that 400,000 square feet, we just set this goal on Friday. And I think that as we start to see the communications plan roll out that Jeannie covered during that presentation, I think we'll start to see a greater uptake in our program, especially around the turf replacement program. I will note that many of the other devices and incentives we have offered, we actually have already achieved the monthly target to date for the month of July. So that's really great. And we'll continue to push those programs through our outreach and messaging. Contacts with customers. This is a metric that we've been showing over the last few months, and I think it's really important. I think it really goes to help us understand that the level of engagement that we're seeing within the community, especially around water waste, and then reaching out to the conservation staff. So starting with water waste, we still have our online form, we have a water waste hotline, and then we also have door tags. Just for the month of July so far, we already have 520 water waste reports. We recognize that with the assigned irrigation days, our customers now have a better understanding of when they should be irrigating and when their neighbors should be irrigating. So it makes sense that those calls are starting to come in and become more robust. In addition, we do have an increase in number of door tags that the district staff are issuing as well. And then as far as, before we move on, calls and emails, while it still is quite busy, you see the month of July, we're kind of on track to have a decline from June. And I think part of that is that we've been increasing our accessibility of our online documentations and program information, specifically around applications. So many of our applications are now online forms and they no longer have to be printed. And it's often a struggle for customers. And so we were really trying to streamline that process to simplify it for staff, but also for our customers. Finally, wanted to wrap up with some additional drought activities that are currently under development. The board has heard a few times in just kind of very high level that we're working on a survey and focus group. So I wanted to provide a little bit more details specifically around the time frame. So we're starting with our highest water users, and we're currently developing the questions. So we're looking to having those questions finalized in the coming week, and then we'll start the survey. The survey will go out. We have a consultant on board who has a lot of experience performing water specific surveys. So we think that with their expertise and our questions, we'll be able to get some good information. We'll have those final results for that survey in August. As a follow-up, then we'll do a focus group to kind of build on the insights and the information that we gained from the survey. Furthermore, we're also considering looking at doing the same process with customers who have lawns, kind of increasing our understanding about what would motivate those folks to remove their lawn, or at least kind of make that change to stop irrigation or reduce the irrigation during the time of drought, as far as drought response. So as that the lawn survey and focus group gets developed, we'll be sure to keep the board up to date on the status and timing of that. But right now we're focusing on high water users. Another resource that we're putting together is a landscape professional training series. This is going to be 5 30-minute tailgate sessions that we're really going to focus in on our restrictions and survival tactics for local landscape professionals to utilize. We're working with Dr. Dave Fugino from UC Davis, who we had the pleasure of. He joined a few of our board meetings, and so he's been a great resource. And we think those will be really high quality presentations. We'll record those webinars so that we can use them as future resources as well. And finally, from input from the board meeting on Friday, we are working on developing the high efficiency toilet rebate program to bring that back. That will be up for brought back for the board's consideration at a future meeting. And so with that, I'll turn it over to our Director of Operations, Paul Sellier.
I'm sorry, before we move on, just to keep you for just a minute, Carrie, can you go back to the slide about the incentive program targets? Yeah, so that's really helpful. So I just want to take a minute and flag that I think it's really important that you guys have set the targets, and I admire that. The question I have right now is some of these are super low. I mean, I think a monthly target of 10 for gray water incentives might have been a great place to start, but I think for all of these, I'd like to hear from you a little bit about increasing these targets so that we're, I mean, I understand that there's a resource constraint, but I think we as the board need to have a sense of, what resources do you need to meet more ambitious targets? So if you can speak a little bit about increasing some of these, because they're, I mean, I understand they're a lift, but I think especially since we're exceeding some of them, we can maybe do a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we just worked out and established these targets, or even presented them, right? They're not even set in stone. They're really just what we presented last week, and I think they will take a bit more discussion and refinement as we move forward. I didn't want to just put them up here without having targets, right? I want to show that we are aiming for something, and these targets will absolutely. I mean, I think that we can have a discussion about refining them as we move forward. And yeah, so I think we're open to that.
Okay, great. Then my only other question was, I think it's great that you're going to be working with landscape professionals. What about the qualified water landscaper program? I know that you're an expert in that. Are you thinking about providing some qual classes for local landscapers?
Yeah, so we are currently working with the California Water Efficiency Partnership to offer Bay Area wide qual classes, right? So that we can, kind of leverage the not just focus in on we don't have our landscape contractor pool, because we have, they work all over the Bay Area. And I think that we will see those starting to increase as well. So for sure, these are more vignettes. I mean, that qual class is a 20-hour training, right? And that's a commitment. What we want to do is give people tools and actionable items that they can do right now that have an impact.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I just wanted to be sure that you had the bigger trainings on your calendars, in your sites as well.
Sure, thanks.
Good evening, Paul Sellier, Operations Director. Very brief update this evening. We just chatted on Friday about emergency drought projects, and just for anyone newly listening, when we say drought projects, we're talking about very specific projects that will address our need in the next year or so, as reflected on this chart in terms of timeline. And a drought project, therefore, doesn't necessarily mean that we're looking at a full suite of water supply projects. Many of those water supply projects will take years to develop and implement, and the time frame implied by this slide, as we'll get into in a minute, it looks like a supplemental water supply might be necessary by next year. So with that, looking at this planning projection for a drought project. What we can see here is our reservoir storage levels. And the slide goes through, from January 2020 all the way through December of 2022, reflecting the level of water in our reservoirs. Currently, as Lucy noted, about 34,000 acre feet or so in the reservoirs in July. And what we're forecasting or projecting with this slide is based on receiving the same amount of rainfall and runoff, so the same hydrology as we did in 2020. These dashed lines, the gray one and the green one, representing respectively a 20% conservation and a 40% conservation level, provide for us an idea of where our storage levels will be by next July. And we can see that the gray line crosses into the 10,000 acre foot sort of uncertainty level in our reservoirs around July, and the green line sometime in September. So the latter half of 2022, it does seem indicated based on these assumptions that a supplemental water supply would be needed. And as we briefly look at those assumptions, 2020 was not the worst runoff and rainfall year, but it was a La Nina year. And this year, again, La Nina seems to be indicated. So I think it's a reasonable attempt at a project planning to set a time frame for supplemental water supply. Next slide. So we looked at two potential water supply projects, a land-based desalination plant, sort of a temporary facility. The total project cost would range somewhere between $30 and $40 million. It does look like the project could be developed within the 12 months, but it's capacity limited. As noted at the top here, it's a 3.6 thousand acre foot or 3.6 MGD, million gallon per day plant. And we're seeking to provide water for about 15,000 acre feet, which represents, if you recall one of the slides Lucy was looking at, our indoor water use. With continuing with desal, the regulatory process for desal is not well defined, and there have been no plants constructed on San Francisco Bay. Looking at water transfers, the volume of water that we need appears to be available in the range of 15,000 acre feet or 13.5 million gallons per day, for a total project cost of somewhere between $60 and $90 million. Again, the project does appear to be deliverable within 12 months and the capacity is adequate. The regulatory process for a project like this is well defined, and our indications by talking to some suppliers for water, they do indicate that water appears to be available for purchase. Water transfers are a fairly common feature of water supply planning in California, and hundreds of transfers do occur each year. Next slide. So as I mentioned, this is a schedule for the water transfer project. As we look at this slide, just a couple of things jump out at me anyway, and one is the sort of overlapping or parallel sets of tasks, which really indicate that this is a compressed schedule. It's actually a very aggressive overall project schedule. Looking at it in some detail, on the left, you'll see it's broken up into 3 phases, with the water transfer in blue, the pipeline planning in orange, and the pipeline design and construction in green. Presently, we're assessing our options for water supply, who's out there who can provide water for us in the water transfer portion of the project, while we're simultaneously looking and verifying the feasibility of putting the pipeline on the bridge. And that involves working with Caltrans to understand what the best place on the bridge would be to locate the pipeline. Indicated on the slide also are a number of places where we think the board authorization will be necessary should the board decide that this is the project they would like to move forward with. And next slide. So next steps, this is for the overall presentation tonight. We'll continue with our drought outreach efforts, noting that we'll bring our operational data to the board and continue pursuing water supply projects such as the water transfers, which really is the main project that appears to be able to provide the volume of water, at least compared to desal, that we would need. We'll be continuing to monitor and report to the board on the status of our conservation goals and even perhaps changing those as we go. We'll be continue and again, closing with water transfer options and infrastructure planning. I think that's the end of the presentation this evening.
Sorry. Do we have any board comment on the presentation before we turn to public comment? Okay. Molly, do you want me to take public comment on the presentation, or do you want me to open the public hearing on the ordinance?
President Kohler, I think we have a separate presentation on the ordinance, so I think we
Okay.
can just take public comment and then move to the next presentation for that.
Okay, fine. Terry, do we have any public comments on the presentation? And for the public, this was an information item. The action item is the next item on the ordinance.
Yes, President Kohler, we have a couple of comments for just the drought. The first person is caller 8800. Hello, caller.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay, Nancy Okada. I'm interested in knowing where, given the drought is pretty much statewide, although Los Angeles is not really paying much attention, where you will be getting the water from in the Central Valley. Who has water that they are willing to sell? How much are they willing to sell it to us for? And how will that fit into the cost of putting a pipeline across the bridge? Thank you.
Would you like me to address that, President Kohler?
I'm sorry, I missed that. I was distracted for a second. Can you say again?
Is it okay if I answer that question?
Oh, of course, absolutely.
To answer your question, it does appear that water is available up in the Sacramento area. And there are a number of water agencies or irrigation districts that either have water that they regularly sell as part of water transfers and have indicated that water might be available. We are, of course, still really in the early stages of investigating the availability and looking into the surety of that supply. As to how that would fit with respect to the bridge project, I'm not clear what your question was getting at there.
Well, you stated at the Friday meeting that it was Glenn County or Colusa County who had water that was available and that we could put some money down and reserve it on the water market. And maybe you can do that, as well as, how does that fit in with the overall cost of $60 million to put the pipeline across the bridge?
Well, I would say at this point, we're really in the very early stages, and we're talking to a host of potential water sellers. And we'll be bringing back to the board and public at subsequent meetings more details as we find them out on both the feasibility of the pipe on the bridge and more refined costs for that capital project, as well as what the opportunities look like in terms of water transfers, including the costs.
But if I recall what you said at the Friday meeting that in fact you could put some money down for the water that's available up in the Central Valley, and it seemed as though the board was interested in doing that.
Yeah.
And how much was that? The public should know that. Why don't you say it now?
Well, I just didn't want to suggest that we know more than we do, but specifically that's called options. And it's a common practice where you would put a small amount of the actual costs for the water down, and that would likely be our first step in the process. We just don't know yet by really any stretch of where specifically we'd be bringing to the board the folks that have water and are ready to commit to water in terms of options. So that will definitely come in the weeks ahead as we better understand this opportunity.
But don't you agree that in
I
the
think
in the
we
light
need
of
to move on.
transparency, that in fact, if for transparency, that it would be better to in fact have the public know that in fact you are putting money down on water for the pipeline, that there is water out there that somehow you have identified, whereas the rest of the state seems to be unable to find water, although I understand other districts can find water. So in terms of the public is being asked to really conserve, use extreme measures to conserve, and it helps to have more transparency rather than less transparency. So if in fact they know that you're going to put the money down, the district's putting the money down on this water, I think it would be good if you in fact gave the public the specifics. Thank you.
Thank you. I have next two speakers. The first one's Paul Mann, then phone number 1402. Mr. Mann, please.
Hi, this is Paul Mann from Water Champions. Thank you so much for taking my call. And thanks for all you're doing during this challenging period. I have two questions for you. Can consumers expect to see a price increase for the water transfer? In other words, the cost of doing that? And the second one is, can you explain the water recycling project? I didn't quite understand what that is.
Ben, is that you or is that Paul? For those two questions.
I can try to tackle them if you'd like. Yeah, I'm not sure what the water recycling project. Oh, earlier on in the presentation. I'm sorry. Yes. So there is the district has constructed a residential pickup station for recycled water, where residents can come and once we have the permit in hand from the state, the residents will be able to go there with containers, receive some quick training on the use of recycled water and some labels for their containers, and they'll be able to pick up to 300 gallons of water. And they can take that water home and use it to irrigate their plants. So that was the recycled water project. And I apologize, I've forgotten the first part of the question.
Sure. Can consumers expect to see a price increase for the water transfer project or for the desalination project that you're considering?
Yeah, I'll just say all the costs we incur in this organization are funded by our customers, our ratepayers. But at this point, we're just in the feasibility stage. And were this to progress as we bring the detailed costs to the board, all of the potential costs to the customers would certainly be part of that discussion.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The next speaker is 1402. Mr. Holmes.
James Holmes. The Independent Journal reported that Newsom's drought declaration relating to Marin authorized the release of water, the reduced release of water for fish maintenance. And as I recall, that option is under study by the district. And my question is that understanding of Newsom's declaration correct in the IJ? And when does the district plan to complete its study and make a decision as to whether or not it will reduce releases for fish maintenance?
My understanding of the governor's order is encouraging his staff to support efforts associated with the process, which is an temporary urgency change petition. We're currently studying that And we're expecting sometime next month to bring back to our board the results of that study. And then the board would make a decision if we do want to submit the petition to the state for the various resource agencies to review it.
Thank you.
There are no further comments.
Okay, and I'm guessing there's no further board comments, but let me just make sure before we move on. Okay, we'll now move on.
I have a question.
I'm so sorry.
On the recycled water, Healdsburg is doing delivery of recycled water. And I know you guys are just gearing up on basic providing recycled water, but it's something we might want to take a look at if this situation continues. I haven't seen the details of it, but apparently they have a program to deliver. So, and that might sort of blend in with our rainwater collection effort. So just throwing that out there for consideration.
Okay.
Sure, we'll take a look.
That's going to bring us to item 4, which is the public hearing on adoption of proposed ordinance number 453, setting forth restrictions on potable water landscape installations for new service connections.
Good evening, board members. Mike Bond, Director of Engineering Special Projects. I have a short presentation on tonight's item, so I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So 2 weeks ago tonight, on July 6th, the board adopted Ordinance 452 to add additional mandatory water conservation measures. In addition to adopting Ordinance 452, the board also directed staff to present an ordinance at tonight's meeting requiring new connections to defer potable water irrigated landscape installation until after the conclusion of the water shortage emergency. And so tonight we're bringing you Ordinance 453, restrictions on potable water landscape installations for new water service connections. So I'm just going to briefly go over the key provisions of Ordinance 453 in my next couple slides. One of the things that Ordinance 453 does is bring forward a couple prohibitions that were actually adopted in Ordinance 449 back on April 20th. And this includes prohibiting new connections that include single pass cooling systems and non-recirculating systems for conveyor car wash applications. So what we're doing here is for these two items, we're bringing them forward from Ordinance 449 and adding them to Ordinance 453. The next slide is the key provision of Ordinance 453. Ordinance 453 prohibits for all new water service connections the use of potable water for installation of new landscaping until after termination of the current water shortage emergency. Under Ordinance 453, during the water shortage emergency, new water service connections will only be approved if the applicant acknowledges in writing that either 1, the project does not include new landscaping to be irrigated with potable water, or 2, new landscaping to be irrigated with potable water will not be installed until after termination of the water shortage emergency. So this is the key provision of Ordinance 453. And so tonight, district staff recommends the board adopt Ordinance 453, adding potable water landscape installation restrictions for new water service connections. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Molly, I never get this quite right. Am I now opening the public hearing?
Yes.
Or do we take board? Okay, so I'm opening the public
We can
hearing.
do it now.
Very exciting. We're opening the public hearing on this item. We're going to hear first from the board and then we'll go to public comment. Board comment on this item, on the ordinance that's being proposed.
So just to clarify, this is mirroring the North Marin ordinance.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, yeah. Okay, just for clarification. Thanks a lot, Mike.
Any other board comments? Okay, this might be a little technical, Molly, but maybe you can help me out here. We're defining, I just want to just make sure we're all clear about exactly what we're doing. We're defining new water connection for the purposes of subsection C, dealing with new landscaping, but we also say that certain things are prohibited for new water connections, having to do with single pass cooling systems, non-recirculating systems. Are you concerned? It looks to me like it's confusing that you're only defining new water service connections specifically for section C, but what about A and B, which are also prohibited for all new water service connections?
Right. I think that's an excellent question, President Kohler. And to help you and the public understand our approach, I go back to the point that Mike Bond made earlier, which is we're really working within the existing structure of the ordinances that have been adopted by the board. And we're trying to be very surgical here in the insertion of new subsection C. So I was trying to not reinvent the wheel with respect to those provisions that were already in the ordinances that are adopted previously. And also you'll notice that there's a new effective date in subsection C because it's actually the only new provision here that's being inserted and adopted, even though we're putting it in the context of the existing structure of our mandatory water conservation ordinances that the board has previously adopted. So I think for purposes of our water service connections, for single pass cooling and non-recirculating for conveyor car washes, those are pretty specific and they've been in place for a long time. I don't think that the staff will be confused about that. And I don't think that they really touch upon or include potentially landscaping. If they do, I think they would still be included in the prohibition in subsection C. So that's a little bit of the thinking behind it. And I'm hoping that it is clear to public and staff when it gets implemented if the board adopts it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I have a question actually. If approved, does this take effect immediately? And are there any exceptions because of timing or projects that are far enough along or anything like that?
Right, excellent question, Director Gibson. It would take effect immediately under the water code sections. We're operating under kind of an urgency ordinance allowance. And so the new ordinance would take effect immediately. The date here specific to this prohibition would be July 21st. However, because we inserted the provision into the existing mandatory water conservation ordinances that were previously adopted, the variances and the appeals process all do apply. So if there's some justification for a variance in certain circumstances, there is room for consideration. There is not a grace period, if that's what you were asking specifically. We did not incorporate that into this particular provision. So hopefully that answers that.
And then Molly, I had one other thing on subsection 2 under C. You've set it up as an or, is it either or? So one is the proposed project does not include any new landscaping that will be irrigated using potable water, which seems just right to me. I'm concerned about 2. It basically says, or you can basically go ahead and put in landscaping that will be irrigated, but you just won't do that irrigation until after the termination of the drought emergency. And I have to say, given the situation and given that we don't think, from everything we're hearing, we're talking about a permanent pipeline over the bridge and other fairly extensive projects. I think I'm not comfortable going forward with new landscaping with that is destined to be irrigated with potable water supply. So I would propose eliminating, I guess I'm proposing to my fellow board members, eliminating subsection 2 under C and just leaving it at that the project will not include any new landscaping that will be irrigated with potable water. I think that's cleaner. I think that's more consistent with what we're being, with what we're having to do in terms of this drought. I think we're all clear that this is not a short-term situation and that we need to be significantly more cautious and prudent with our use of potable supplies going forward. So I don't really see the reason for that exception, but I'm interested in what my fellow board members think about that.
I think it's an interesting idea. I would certainly encourage gray water, rainwater. You know, today I saw a huge landscaping project going in Corte Madera at the Village Shopping Center. Trees, everything we're trying to discourage. So, you know, I think it's a good idea. It's kind of a bold step. I think it's a good step. You know, I'm willing to support it. I think we're going to get some variance requests on it, but you know, that's how we're going to have to deal with it. So,
And I think, yeah, I agree. Well, thank you for that, Larry. I appreciate that. And I think you're right. I think the variance process is the way to deal with that when there's reasons for exceptions, but so thank you for that. Any other board comment on my friendly amendment to the ordinance?
I would ask Mike, who's working on this, is there some wrinkle to that suggestion that we might not be focusing on?
I think and Molly, jump in here, but I think the idea here was that somebody might want to use an alternate water source for their irrigation, such as gray water.
Right.
And they would be able to do that.
But gray water is not a potable supply. So I think that would not be affected by my amendment.
No.
If I can clarify, I think President Kohler, what you're asking for is a permanent ban on the use of potable water for irrigation of new landscape installation. And I think that's something that, you know, staff internally has looked at and considered. I think that it could be something that the board could direct staff to bring back, because it has potential for additional complications in the implementation that we haven't fully thought through here necessarily. This particular provision is, as directed, more of a mirror of the North Marin pause on new connections installing landscape during the drought, and it is brought as part of the water conservation measures. It's certainly something that we could do. It may be, and I would defer to staff on this, something that staff would want to think through a bit more. But if you know, the direction of the board is that we eliminate that subsection.
So, Molly, if I could, one, I assume you would have indicated if you felt that it was inconsistent with a public notice, given it's a pretty significant change. But if it works now, wouldn't be an issue. And I just want to ensure that, you know, the board appreciates, and I know you do, the significance of that direction. You know, it's not drought tolerant landscaping. It's landscaping that requires any potable water use. So it is a pretty bold step to go. But to me, it's not going to take staff analysis. It really is a policy decision. I think that's pretty clear at this point.
Yeah, so I mean, the question to me really is there adequate notice? I think it's actually a really good idea. I think it is a major step. And whether, you know, folks are comfortable moving forward or want to bifurcate the issue. But it's a very interesting idea.
I think it's a very good idea. I am a little concerned about what I don't know here. And I'm not sure of the impact. I would be more comfortable bringing it, you know, giving some thought to it and bringing it back so that we don't make a mistake with the ordinance that we're looking at.
Yeah,
I agree. I think I was trained in the basis of little steps for little feet. And I think we should stick with what we got. It's better to get it in place as it is. And then if we need to have another ordinance or amend this one, we can do that. I think it's an interesting idea. I think it's unfair to users if we don't have an alternative water supply to offer them. And I understand gray water is the thought, but the problem with gray water is this subsurface injection that's required by the health department, the state health department. that's a whole different animal that I'm not sure most people are ready to fully appreciate what that means and what the impact might be on their operations.
Assuming we pass this ordinance tonight, could we have a date certain when this concept would be brought back to us for evaluation and possibly amending the ordinance?
I think from a staff standpoint, we could certainly say by the second meeting in August. So basically just not the next board meeting, but the following one, we could bring it back for consideration.
I think that would be a good idea.
Yeah.
I'd also like to thank Molly and the staff for cranking this out as quickly as they did, and appreciate it. You basically followed what we requested at the last meeting.
Right.
And I think you did a great job.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to elaborate too much. I did talk to the assemblyman in Nevada where they did the non-usable turf ordinance, and there's a few little hiccups in actually implementing it, but I do think it's something we need to look into and seriously consider. So with all due respect to the friendly amendment, I think at this point, maybe we should put it off until next month. That's kind of, I do agree with that.
Okay, so we'll go to public comment in a second. I'm just going to explain my position. So I hear what you're all saying, and I don't disagree. I will be assuming that there's a motion that goes forward. I will be abstaining because while I hear what you're all saying, and I don't have a major disagreement, I'm uncomfortable with the whole first half of this meeting being about the severity of the drought, how much we're asking from our customers now, but we're just really going to go ahead, with new landscape. And it's just a little too much cognitive dissonance for me. So I respect where you're all coming from. I'll look forward to supporting the next iteration of this when it comes back in August, but I'm just personally not comfortable with what feels to me like a dissonant message going forward. So I value the conversation and look forward to continuing. So if there's no further board comment, I want to open it now, Terry, to public comment.
President Kohler, right now we have a few hands. If you want, I can limit the time to 2 minutes, or if you want to have it to 3.
I think we can give people 3 minutes. This is an important issue.
Okay.
Unless we have 100 people lined up. We seem to have a pretty moderate crowd tonight.
No, we can do 3. So the first 2 speakers, Peter Anderson, then the phone number 8800. Go ahead, Mr. Anderson.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I have a paper that I'd like to read to you. Bill McKibben, author, environmentalist, and activist, said we are in World War III as we face extreme climate disruption, and we are losing the war. Yesterday, 48,000 acres were burned at the Bootleg fire, 2 times the size of MMWD land. Within months after the devastating attack at Pearl Harbor, FDR had ensured that mandatory gasoline rationing was in effect in all 48 states. Gas and rubber was needed for an all-out war effort. Americans would sacrifice driving their sacred automobiles for the duration. At first, the government urged voluntary gasoline rationing. That did not work. But by the spring of 1942, 6 months after the attack, the first 17 states put mandatory gasoline rationing into effect. And by December, controls were extended across the country. FDR didn't wait for a messaging program to raise awareness. He did what he had to do. People accepted it because it was appropriate to the threat. It was fair and it was strictly enforced. It was the law. The entire Western US is drying up and burning up. We too are under attack. Therefore, We need you, the board members, to enact proposals with teeth that will ensure wholehearted cooperation now. To conserve drinking water, we don't need proposals that make suggestions, act politely, and hope for the best. We are asked to make significant cuts in our use of water at the household level. I believe the response you're looking for will be overwhelming when we believe that you are so committed to conservation of our limited water supply that you will declare it is illegal to water lawns and golf courses, and most difficult for you, to declare a moratorium on all new water hookups. Convince us that you realize the gravity of our shared predicament and that you'll do whatever it takes to realize significant cutbacks immediately, regardless of public resistance and or political consequences that strict water rationing may bring forth. Gabriel Garcia Marquez said, "Wisdom comes to us when it can no longer do any good." Do we have the courage to prove him wrong? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, 8800.
Hi, Nancy Okada. I agree we need a moratorium on new water hookups, and to that point, before we even talk about landscaping, I'd like to know how many new water hookups are currently pending in your system, and what is the average number of new water service connections you approve each month, and how are those, how much water is being allocated to each of those new water service connections? Because we are being asked to conserve 40% of our water, and we want to do that, but when you're giving away water to other people, it doesn't seem that it's fair, and I agree with Director Kohler. Thank you.
Thank you. The next two speakers are Grace Garrity and then Frank Egger. Go ahead, Grace.
Yes, I agree with the previous two speakers and totally support President Kohler. We are in a severe emergency. It's only going to get worse. Climate scientists are predicting a dust bowl for the next 10, etc. years. I don't know why you are all waiting and kicking the can down the road. It is just mind-boggling to me. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead, Mr. Egger.
Thank you, Terry. Frank Egger here, Fairfax. The California Environmental Quality Act issues with either a pipeline on the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge or a desalination plant, even a temporary one, must be addressed before any final decision is made. It's becoming very clear the ordinance you're looking at this evening, limiting potable water to landscaping restrictions, is insufficient to address the current water shortage. Just for your information, and many of you probably already know this, water thefts are proving to be a huge issue all over California. Some water districts are actually putting locks on fire hydrants and other water release facilities. I mean, folks are driving up with tanker trucks, hooking them up to a fire hydrant and filling them up, and then going out and selling the water. The Central Marin Sanitation Agency treats up to 12 million gallons a day of our wastewater and discharges it into San Pablo Bay. They cannot remove either the legal or the illegal drugs, or fluoride or chloramine. The CMSA needs reverse osmosis treatment of their wastewater before discharging into San Pablo Bay. And if they had reverse osmosis right now, they could be taking tanker trucks in and filling them up, and those could be used for outdoor irrigation. Now is the time to prohibit all new water connections, with the only exception being a water connection for a 100% low-income project. Allowing 1,200 square foot accessory dwelling units with no new water meter and not requiring the ADA to be even guaranteed low income does not make sense at all, given our predicament. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Their last speaker is Baron Hamill, please.
Thank you and good evening. As an advocate of water conservation, I'm disheartened by the irresponsible attitude of people who think that they don't need their interests disrupted for the better good. One doesn't start saving for retirement at 60 years old. So why are we not being more aggressive in water conservation measures now, rather than taking a wait and see approach for our rainy season, which is already predicted to be drier than normal? Take Tier 4 water users, for example. I believe that their usage needs to be reined in, forgive the pun. When looking towards the future, will golf courses be irrigating with potable water when we have the inevitable pipeline across the bridge to bring drinking water for elsewhere, and everyone will be making further reductions of their water usage? If not, then why are we waiting to mandate that they reduce their water usage? Why not mandate it now? People are encouraged to let their lawns go brown, and rebates are given to encourage this, yet greens are still green. Yes, I appreciate that golf courses have already reduced their water consumption by 40%, but 60% is still a whole lot of water being used for grass. And at the Mill Valley Golf Course, their water allowance is being diverted from public parks and playing fields, so others are making the sacrifice for the golfers. Where's the equity in this? To put this in clearer perspective, in the summertime, I'm using an average of only 130 gallons a day, including garden irrigation. In 2020, the Mill Valley Golf Course alone used 12 million gallons of water. Reduced by 40%, it's now 7,200,000 gallons a year, or 19,726 gallons average per day across the year. This one-day amount would provide enough water for my household for 152 days, based on the summer calculation, and even more days in the winter. And that's just one golf course in one day. Multiply this by several golf courses in our district, and you can see why I'm struggling to comprehend the current golf course water allowance. I believe that this subject needs to be addressed now before we reach the critical stage of having to import water at great expense, and an expense that will be passed along to our customers. This cost might even be lessened by immediately changing the way golf courses are using a commodity that's meant to be for everyone rather than a few. I appreciate you looking at this from the perspective of doing what's socially and morally responsible in the midst of a severe drought, because I personally find it challenging to ask the general public to make such a sacrifice when the disparity of its definition is so great. Thank you again for your attention.
Thank you. And actually, we do have one more speaker. The last four digits, 1402.
James Holmes, Larkspur. The ordinance is a good start. Thank you for proceeding on it. Thank you for the anticipated amendment, which will make it better. But we still do need a water connection moratorium. We keep reading of new projects proposed almost every other day in the IJ, it seems. And that makes projections about how much savings could be used unreliable. But it does appear that savings will be achieved by cutting hookups, and certainly credibility will be enhanced. And finally, it's ironic, at least to judge from yesterday's Independent Journal, development advocates used to insist correctly that the district is not a land planning agency and it should focus on delivering water. But now the opponents of hookups seem to be arguing that it should be a land planning agency focusing on housing shortages. It should be a civil rights agency using water to remedy ancient violations of civil rights or maybe discriminatory zoning. And every other consideration besides focusing strictly on water. So I would urge you to please focus directly on water, focus on the customer, and continue to consider and implement a new connection ban. Thank you.
Thank you. And we do actually have one more speaker. Laura Sheraton, please.
Hi, my name is Laura Cheriton. I'm with the Watershed Alliance of Marin. I live on Panoramic Highway in Mill Valley and have been here in Marin for about 45 years. I've been through a couple of droughts. I just want to echo everything that Peter Anderson said. I have the exact sentiment that he expresses, and Nancy Okada and Frank Egger, and I didn't catch the woman's name about the golf course, but I agree about that too. So I'm just registering my opinion as duplicate of theirs. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any more raised hands, ma'am.
Great, thanks, Terry. I'm now going to close the public hearing, right, Molly? And bring it back to the board. I'll just say just for myself, one last comment. While it is my general instinct to agree with Director Russell on most things, I think I think in this instance, I think the time for little steps for little feet, for me at least, has passed. We've been in this situation for many months, and I believe the incremental approach that we've taken hasn't even been that incremental. I think it's been fairly aggressive, and I think it's been appropriate. But for me, this is one step that is too little. So, but with that, I'll see if there's a motion to adopt the ordinance. I think as it is. I didn't hear any other support for amending the ordinance at this time.
I'll make a motion to adopt number 453.
I'll second. I see Larry. Oh, there he is.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I support the amendment. I don't support doing it without notice.
Oh, fair enough.
I'd actually request if we could get a preliminary staff report at our first meeting in August, just so the board has sort of an idea of what we're going to be doing. I think it would be helpful rather than waiting until the second week in August. So, but I do support ordinance 453.
Okay. And Larry, do you think we should extend the application period to hit that meeting? It's currently 10 days, which is the 30th, give or take. So we could make it 15 days, which would put it on top of that meeting. First meeting in August.
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
Maybe I didn't understand what you were saying. What I heard you say is that you were concerned about going forward without notice. I presume that means people need time to respond to what we're proposing to do. I assume that's what the notice you're talking about is.
No,
what I'm proposing is that we hold. Go ahead.
You're breaking up.
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
I think we should move ahead with this. And what I was talking about is notice as to President Kohler's amendment, which was not noticed to the public. So I was asking the staff if we could get a report in 30 days instead of 45 days, and then maybe take up the.
I gotcha.
Okay. So no, I think the idea is a good idea. We've talked about, banning non-functional turf, and, from what I saw at the Village Shopping Center today, I mean, we do need to take more affirmative steps, and I do agree with the concept behind the amendment. So I do support Ordinance 453 as presently drafted.
And to that end,
can I just, excuse me, Larry, can I just get a quick point of clarification from Molly? I thought you'd said earlier that today's notice was sufficient for, and again, I'm not pushing the board on this, but I thought you'd said today's notice was sufficient if there was going to be the amendment that I proposed.
I think I'd have to look specifically at the public hearing notice. The ordinance is written, is entitled installation restrictions for new water service connections. So perhaps that's broad, but there is also a posting 72 hours prior to the meeting that has a draft of the ordinance. So, I think it's fine to make, like I've said in the past, targeted revisions, but anytime we make large substantive changes, it is probably most prudent to come back to the board with something like that.
I see. And you think that this would fall into the category of a large substantive change, just to confirm?
I do, President Kohler, because what I think I'm hearing is that we're talking about sort of a permanent change to new water services connections. So it's a little bit different than something that's just during the drought, is what I'm hearing.
And
Well,
I think
I'm doing it just during the drought, but whatever, it's fine.
it's an excellent idea. It's just, you know, it's a big idea, and you know, that's my hesitation. So.
Okay, well, we have a motion and a second, so I guess we need a roll call vote.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Kohler.
Abstain.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Before we leave this, I'd like to add one more thing, Cynthia.
Of course.
My wife and I are cruising along very comfortably at more than 50% reduction in water usage. Just so people know that it's completely doable from my experience. We were not high water users before, and we're using a lot less now. The other thing I noticed in that Nevada law, which I thought was interesting, is it excludes houses from the restrictions on ornamental turf, which I thought was kind of interesting. That's just a comment.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, everybody who participated in the public ordinance. We're going to move on now to item 5 on the regular calendar, the Smith Saddle Tank Rehabilitation Project.
Hi, good evening, directors. Crystal Yasmin, Director of Engineering. I just want to introduce this item. It was originally agendized for last Friday's Operations Committee, but due to time constraints, we moved it to tonight. So tonight we're going to give you an informational item. We just completed an assessment, a seismic analysis and structural condition assessment of our Smith Saddle tanks, 2 very important tanks in our system. And so we're going to present the results of that analysis. And if it's a very complicated, detailed report, I know there's a number of questions in regards to the technical details. And so we'll try to answer those questions tonight to the extent possible. But if more information is needed, we're certainly willing and able to come back with clarifications at a later time. So with that, let me hand it over to Alex Anaya, our engineering manager for design and construction.
Hi, good evening, directors. I got a little PowerPoint presentation. Just bear with me one second while I share my screen. Okay, let's see how this is going to work. Okay.
I like it, Alex, already. You've got the reservoirs full in your picture. That's great.
So you see the full
just like that.
view. Bear with me one second. I got to readjust my camera since things are swapped. Okay.
Alex, I don't think we see the whole slide. I think it's cut off.
You don't see the entire slide? Are you just seeing half the slide?
Yes.
Okay. Let me just see if I could. Are you seeing the whole slide now, or is it still cut off?
Well, now it's the preview slide page.
But it's all of it.
It's, you see 2 slides at once.
Okay. All right. Are you just seeing the one slide right now?
Yeah.
Half of it.
Half of it. I think you have to share a different screen.
Okay, hold on one second. Bear with me. Just stop sharing. 1 year in this, and I still don't get the technology right.
Well, let's hope you don't have to get too much more practice.
There it is. There it is. Thank you, Alex.
Okay, is that working?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So, okay, good afternoon, directors. I'm Alex Anaya, engineering manager of the design section. This evening, I'll be presenting or providing an informational update on the Smith Saddle Tanks Rehabilitation Project and the findings from our consultant Kennedy Jinks on the detailed condition assessment they did for both of the tanks done under the first phase of this project. Co-presenting with me this evening is Don Barraza, project manager, and Adam Butler, deputy project manager with Kennedy Jinks. So So this evening, first I'll walk us through a little bit of the background of the Smith Saddle tanks, how these tanks function within our system, the assessment conducted by Kennedy Jinks, along with the 3 different rehabilitation alternatives proposed. We'll be getting into the cost analysis, including the 100-year life cycle and maintenance cost, the consultant's recommendation, and we'll be wrapping up with the project funding. So both Smith Saddle tanks were constructed of welded steel in 1960. The tanks function together to provide a total of 10 million gallons of potable water storage for our distribution system. The interior of the tanks consists of a coal tar coating that was originally applied in the 1960s when the tanks were constructed. The exterior of the tanks were recoated in 1983, and typical industry standards for steel tank recoating frequencies approximately every 20 years between coatings, obviously with some considerations to environmental conditions. The Smith Saddle tanks provide water from our San Geronimo water treatment plant via the 33-inch North Marin line to the tanks. From there, water continues into the communities of Sleepy Hollow, Terra Linda, Lucas Valley, Los Ranchitos, and San Rafael. These tanks are the main transmission storage tank connections that receive water from the San Geronimo treatment plant and provide water to the rest of the district's distribution system. So as a result, more water goes through these tanks than any other tank in the system. So back in February, the district awarded a contract to Kennedy Jinks to conduct a thorough condition assessment of both of these tanks. Following award of the contract to Kennedy Jinks, they immediately began with an exterior assessment of both of these tanks, followed by an interior assessment, one of which involved draining one of these tanks and physically going into it to conduct an assessment by the consulting team. Corrosion damage was typically observed within the water vapor area above the tank level, as well as coating failures below the water level. So at this point, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Don Barraza, project manager from Kennedy Jinks. So Don, go ahead and just let me know when you're likely to just change slides.
Thank you, Alex. Can you hear me fine?
Yes.
Yep. So there's a lot of detail and a lot of information presented in the report, and we obviously don't have time to go over it all, but I'm just going to summarize for you quickly some of the findings of the assessment, and I'm going to focus initially on the roofs and then on the shell and the floors. So the tank roofs had significant areas of damage that included crumbling and rust chips coming off of the roof, significant quantities and some very large sizes of corroded steel that could come off the roof, especially if individuals are walking on tops of the tanks. There was significant rock damage on the shells and the roofs of the tanks. And we saw complete failure of the protective coatings on the underside of the roof plates and on the roof framing areas with moderate corrosion and loss of metal. And just to summarize, Alex indicated that we did exterior assessments of both of the tanks, but we also did interior assessments of both of the tanks. One was in the dry, but the other one was also covered with an interior assessment with both a combination of divers and engineers inside the tanks in a raft. So both of the tanks were viewed from the interior and the exterior, and both had very similar levels of damage, and it was confirmed in both of the tanks, the types of damage, the magnitude of the damage, and the extent that we saw in both tanks. They were very similar in their deterioration. So I would single tank differs widely from the other two tanks, or the other tank. As you can see in the images here, you can just really see some of the extensive corrosion, the breakdown in the coatings in these tanks, and the underside of these roof plates in the lower right-hand corner there, where we've seen significant loss of the coating system and extensive loss of metal in the roof plates. Why don't you go ahead and advance to the next slide, Alex? The tank floors are susceptible to corrosion damage from several factors, and we saw a lot of damage on the outside associated with the insufficient slope away from the floor plates of just the grading and ponding of water around the tanks. The oiled subgrade and asphalt material in the tanks have eroded significantly, exposing the underside of the floor plate. And the shell of the floor plates and the connection of the exposed to the underside of the tanks with subgrade materials eroded away from the tanks. And as you can see in the upper left-hand corner here, coal tar exhibited numerous blister domes being fractured and exposing the steel substrate. And while this isn't consistent throughout the entire tank's area, both of the tanks, as documented by divers and with our interior inspections, found many of the floor plates had extensive blister domes on the surfaces of them. The tank shells, as you can kind of see here in the right on the interior and in the lower right on the exterior, had significant areas of damage that included external corrosion beneath the vent sheet metal panels, rock damage exposing the steel with minor rust, especially on the west sides, on the slopes and sides. There was mold under the exterior protective coatings, possibly the result of recoatings and recoatings placed over and over top of each other. And the upper 5 feet of the perimeter shell and interior had extensive coating failure and bare metal exposure. The coal tar was brittle on the interior shells, and it also exhibited numerous blister domes that could be fractured and expose the steel substrate. There's a lot more that could be said about the assessment of the two tanks, and specifically, there was a lot that we evaluated in the corrosion protection elements that are used to protect the tanks and the steel, both the protective coatings and the cathodic protection system improvements. There was significant findings of hazardous materials that are on the existing coatings of the interior and the exterior of the tanks, and those are documented in the report that will need to be addressed in any sort of approach that would make use of the reuse of those tanks, and also the demolition and the disposal of those tanks. And there's a lot that could be covered, and I won't go into all the details of the structural and the seismic evaluations of the tanks, but we found significant areas within the structural and seismic evaluations of the tanks that were documented in the report. And the reservoirs have several deficiencies that were also documented that don't meet with the current Division of Drinking Water regulations for primarily new reservoir construction. But we just saw that some of these areas had not been upgraded or improved in the tanks. The tank assessments also included safety evaluations, primarily for protection of anybody accessing the tanks or operating on the roof of the tanks. And we found that there were several areas that could be improved in preventing the potential for worker protection on the tanks, primarily with fall hazards from the tanks. And there were two topics that were touched on in the report, and they were primarily the options of placing solar panels on the roofs of the tanks. And also we looked at an alternative that evaluated replacing of the steel tanks with aluminum roofs. But both of those options, I think, are really at a potential vulnerability for these two tanks based on the way they're sited, because again, of that extensive rock damage that can be seen at the roof of the tanks as rocks are thrown onto the roofs, which kind of makes it prohibitive to proceed with either of those types of options for these tanks at this location. I think we can advance to the next slide, Alex.
Okay.
So 3 different design alternatives were identified and are included in the report after the internal and external assessments were completed, along with the structural and the seismic evaluations. And I'll summarize what the 3 alternatives consist of, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the costs associated with them. So the first alternative developed would be to repair the existing 2 tanks, strengthen the tanks, and recoat the 2 existing tanks. Typical work in this option would include removing and installing an entire new roof on each of the tanks and new roof framing members, including replacement of the upper section of the roof support columns, as well as the replacement of the top shell ring. The existing tanks consist of 4 shell rings. The top shell ring had the most extensive damage to it, so it would require removal of that top shell ring, and then extension of the top shell ring to raise the roof of the 2 tanks to provide additional freeboard for sloshing in seismic events to protect the roof of the tanks. It would include reinforcing the tank floor plates around the bottom of the tanks, and pressure grouting voids beneath the tank floor plates, because there were significant voids identified beneath the tank floor plates, and identifying safety improvements, as I've already discussed, and recoating both the interior and exterior of the tanks. And some improvements to the site drainage system to prevent ongoing damage of the ponded water and the other erosion that we see around the perimeter of the tanks. The second alternative that was developed was to just completely demolish the 2 existing tanks and replace the tanks with with new steel tanks, welded steel tanks of modern construction and in accordance with the current standards for new steel tanks. The second approach would include a complete demolition of both of the existing tanks and excavating and constructing new ring wall foundations to anchor the new tanks too. New inlet and outlet piping in the tanks to improve water quality and circulation in the tanks, and new safety improvements in the tanks. And then again, the new tanks would also have some site drainage improvements, including grading and installing of new storm drains around the tanks and the site access road for great improvements. The Glen Drive Fire Road was identified in all of the tank options as something that needed additional improvements to it primarily for construction, but also for long-term maintenance. And then the third alternative was to construct 2 new 5 million pre-stressed circular concrete tanks to replace the existing tanks. Again, this would involve the demolition of the 2 existing tanks and off-hauling of the steel, and then excavating and constructing new concrete floor slab, footing, tank walls, all of pre-stressed concrete construction with the concrete roof and roof access hatches. Again, new inlet and outlet piping would be constructed, and the drainage systems would be improved on the site. And the exterior of the tanks could be painted for aesthetic purposes, but are not required for corrosion protection on the tanks. So those were the 3 alternatives that were developed. If you want to advance to the next slide, Alex, then we can take a look at some of the costs. As you can see here in this table, you can see the total estimated construction costs for each of the 3 alternatives. 18.6 for the $1 million for the repair and recoating of the existing tanks, 23.6 million for the 2 new welded steel tanks, and 21.6 for the new pre-stressed concrete tanks, each of 5 million gallons construction. In your board packet, you have a little bit more detailed breakdown by division of all of the costs in each of these alternatives, and then also all the notes that kind of provide some of the background of what are the key elements in each of the elements of the cost for the construction cost of the tanks. And the total estimated construction costs for each of the alternatives includes demolition, site improvements, tank reconstruction and replacement, tank coatings, and general markups that you would see on estimates of this type. I would want to caution, I think many people have looked at some of these costs and questioned the costs in comparison with brand new steel tanks or brand new concrete tanks. And I just would keep in mind that the costs that you see here in these estimates, in addition to replacing the tank's cost, also have a lot of elements associated with potentially dealing with a lot of the hazardous materials of the PCBs, the lead, and the disposal of these types of materials, and legally disposing of these materials and transporting them to places that can accommodate them. So as well as some of the project costs that outside of the brand new tanks construction can also drive the cost of the overall project up, including the Glen Drive access road improvements, as well as the site improvements around the tanks. In addition to the construction costs that you see here, the total estimated construction cost in 2021 dollars, we took a look at the 100-year cumulative maintenance cost to arrive at the overall 100-year total life cycle cost. And I'm going to go advance here to the next slide, and we're going to take a little bit more detailed look at the breakdown of that cumulative cost and how it was arrived at.
Before you do that, Don, can you
Yes.
explain why it's 100 years? You have no explanation in the report how you got to 100-year life cycle.
Well, the main reason we take a look at a 100-year life cycle is that 100 years is kind of the life cycle that we look at for the pre-stressed concrete tank. And so the pre-stressed concrete tank we look at as having a 100-year life to it. And so that's why we started with that life for the maintenance costs for the analysis.
Okay, I think you need to explain that in the report because it
Understood.
just comes out of the blue here on the cost table.
Sure.
Without any reference to that, where that came from.
Yep. So now is there any other questions regarding the overall cost estimate before we get into the life cycle cost estimate?
Don, I have a question.
Yes.
The way I read the report, was that the pre-stressed concrete does not require internal tank coating. Is that correct?
It is correct that we don't normally coat the interior walls of a pre-stressed concrete tank exposed to potable water. And generally speaking, a tank constructed, a pre-stressed concrete tank constructed in accordance with ACI 350 with a high water to cement ratio, a low water to cement ratio creates a dense permeable concrete that normally will provide for the life cycle protection of the reinforcement from corrosion in the tank. And so normally we do not put an additional coating on a pre-stressed concrete tank that's exposed to potable water. There are some additional measures that can be taken, and there are some agencies and some water districts that do go beyond that. There are things like crystal and waterproofing admixtures. There are also things like silica fume admixtures, and there are also other coating systems, primarily some of the urethane coating systems that some owners will place on the inside of pre-stressed concrete tanks, but that would not normally be necessary to meet the life cycle costs of a pre-stressed concrete tank, or the life cycle duration, I should say, of a pre-stressed concrete tank.
Okay, because it's the condition of the interior coating of the existing tanks is a big concern to me, and something that really jumped out at me. So
sure, I understand that.
Yeah.
And I would only say that one is that recognize that the way a pre-stressed concrete tank is constructed, it has a relatively thick core wall. Typically a tank of this water depth and diameter would have a core wall that's on the order of about 12 to 15 inches in thickness. But the core wall of that tank is relatively lightly reinforced, and the reinforcing steel in that core wall is embedded at significant depth within the core wall, because a pre-stressed concrete tank does get a lot of its force and a lot of its resistance from the wire wrapping and the strand wrapping on the exterior of the core wall, and the shotcrete protection on the exterior of the core wall. So again, just keep in mind that a pre-stressed concrete tank is less likely to have the reinforcing steel at the shallow depth that you're going to see close to the interior face of a concrete wall, or a standard concrete, conventional concrete tank wall that might be exposed to the interior water surface. I'm not going to say, it's 100% that you're never going to coat the interior of. There could be situations in which the water quality might be very aggressive to the interior concrete, and one might want to take a look at that aggressiveness and evaluate whether or not that would be such that it would reduce the life cycle of the concrete. But I would generally say that we would not put in additional admixtures or coating systems on a pre-stressed concrete tank that's exposed to a potable water.
And what would determine the degree of water damage? Would it be the pH of the water going into the tank?
It would definitely be the pH, an aggressive pH, and possibly also if there were some chemicals in the water. High chlorides, oftentimes from exposure to seawater or other types of groundwater, can sometimes reduce what I would call the ability of the concrete to reach its 50 to 100-year life. And so we wouldn't want to see that the source of water that was in the tanks was such that it could degrade the concrete. But again, a 4,000 to 4,500 PSI concrete with a low water cement ratio, typically these days in a 0.4 range, will provide a very, very dense impermeable surface normally to a potable water source.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, basically it's the same as steel cylinder pipe, mortar lined and coated. So yeah. I agree with that. And recall that, KJ designed our water treatment plants, and we have total control, more or less, of the water quality that's exposed to these tanks. So we can adjust the pH. We can't change the calcium, but the Langler index is going to apply here. And there's no reason to suspect we'd have any particular problems. I'm not aware of any issues that have occurred here in the district with respect to water-lined pipe. So, I wouldn't be too worried about that. I would like to say something before I say too much more, and I'm not going to do too much more at this point, but I will in a minute. I want to say you guys did an excellent job on this report. The only limitation I have is this would have been a superb report in 1960. And what I mean by that is that the idea of the three alternatives, I think, is very apropos when nothing's there. But when there's already a tank there, I have a lot of trouble with the conclusion you guys reached with respect to the concrete, pre-stressed concrete tanks. It's a great alternative, but I just don't see it as the way to go in this particular situation. With respect to that rock issue, I mean, either we put a shield on top of the roof, which could consist of chain link fence or a lot of things. It could be another roof on top of the roof, a thin one that just took the rock hit. I think there's a solution to that problem. I like the aluminum idea. I think that's cute. It doesn't, it doesn't corrode. It's able to deal with the issues that is causing the current problems. This tank is very much like a typical MMWD design at that time, which is minimalistic. I mean, and this is no disrespect to KJ at all, but if you look at the San Geronimo plant, it's a pretty bare bones plant in terms of aesthetics. And these tanks are similar in that these weren't even designed by an engineer. I mean, they were designed by the district, but they weren't designed by a consultant. And they basically were a joint venture almost between the district and the manufacturer of the tanks. The other thing is that, if we haven't touched these things since '83, we're pushing on to 30 years. So in 60 years, they've been recoded once. I think your recommendations are good. 20 years is a good plan, but it cripples the existing tank because it's the largest single cost on your cost estimate is the maintenance of the exterior coating of the tanks. And I think a table like the one you have here in front of us it's way too complicated to go through tonight. I personally need to look at it, but it should be included in the appendix. I think you're missing a whole appendix on cost and cost backup. The other problem I have in that area is the repair costs. You plunk us down basically with a $10 million hit, and but there's no detail to any of it, so it's very hard to judge. Maybe you're right on, maybe you're not. But anyway, I do want to say that what I said at the beginning, you guys did an excellent job on this report. I just thought you kind of eased down on this particular piece, which is how do you get to the cost estimates and what's the backup for the costs? And the readers just left to say, basically go, well, trust me. And I don't, not that I won't trust you, but I can't. So just FYI.
So I won't address each of your comments here, but I will just suggest to point out a couple of things. While it wasn't presented in the appendix as neatly as this graphic is here in the summary table and the chart that follows it, the numbers that are in this summary table and in the graphic that follows it were included in the cost appendices. And the cost appendices do include a very detailed breakdown of all of the quantities for each of the alternatives and all of the markups. And so I think they're about 4 to 5 pages each of the cost estimates for each of the alternatives, listing each item that went into development of those costs. So
can you point me to where they are in the report?
Sure. So in appendix, just a second here.
Director Russell, I believe they are in Appendix G of the report.
Yeah, in Appendix G of the report, you will find the backup for all of the cost estimates, plus all of the assumptions, plus all of the markups, plus the detailed breakdown of the quantities and the costs, the unit costs for each element of the cost estimates.
Okay, I am not sure that I have Appendix G in the report. My report ends with an analytical report on the hazardous materials. Is it? Oh, I see G's after that. Okay. Okay, thank you.
So before I go on, do we have the time to go through this 100-year maintenance cost table, or should we move on?
My preference would be to move on unless the rest of the board members feel differently. It's already 9:15. I know this is our last substantive item, but we've been here a while.
Okay. We'll go ahead and move to the next slide, Don.
Okay, thank you. So in summary, if you take a look at the cumulative costs over 100 years, you can see here the cost differential of the pre-stressed concrete tank at roughly $22,800,000 versus the $43 million for the welded steel tank. And this is again the cost associated with the option of rehabilitating the existing welded steel tanks. The cost associated with replacing the welded steel tanks would even be higher. And again, the significant cost over 100 years. This is recognize that this is a cost that is based on a 2% rate of inflation in developing the cost. And so so that is why the unit costs for the maintenance on each of the 20-year and the 50-year cycle are escalating so significantly as we get further out.
Could we, and I'm just putting this out for the rest of the board, take the more detailed dive into the costs at our next finance meeting?
Or the doc meeting might be better, Larry.
Either one, because I think it's worth taking a deep dive into it. I really do.
I agree with that. And I think Larry Russell's right. I think the doc is a better place than the finance meeting.
Of course, but either one is fine, but it's a significant project. It's in my backyard, so it's of great interest.
Yeah.
So with that, just based on what was presented by Dawn and Kennedy Jinks regarding the tank alternatives, the construction material, estimated costs, life cycle costs, the recommendation, as Don just mentioned, was to proceed with the design of a pre-stressed concrete option to replace the existing welded steel tanks. And district staff did meet together, discuss it, review the report, and concurred with the consultant's recommendation of the findings for the replacement of the tanks with pre-stressed concrete. Obviously, the cost is pretty significant. So currently, the district does have the budget to design the tanks in this current fiscal year. District staff will be looking into construction funding for this project from various funding sources, including state revolving fund, California Infrastructure and Economic Development Bank for low interest loans, as well as grant funding sources. The benefit of having the tanks designed complete and shovel ready will allow the district to take advantage of any grant funding opportunities that may become available for these types of projects that are ready to go to construction.
Alex, how long would it take to work up a preliminary design sufficient to go for a public works grant?
Don, that would be based on the original schedule, about 6 to 7 months for a design. Is that correct, Don?
That's accurate, Alex.
Yeah.
Okay, and one other question. We put in that new pump station next to the tanks.
Correct.
Last year. I'm assuming that would continue to be used and that these would be hooked back into that system.
That is absolutely correct. We will not lose functionality of that pump station we just constructed.
A better way to put it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So any other questions at this point to discuss?
Yes, could you go back one slide?
Sure.
So on the funding, it seems to me that the big thing that's missing here is WIFIA. I mean, WIFIA is exactly for projects like, are you guys familiar with WIFIA?
I am not, but I will definitely look into it.
Okay, so WIFIA is the federal It's the federal companion to the state revolving funds, but it's for much bigger projects. I mean, I think the smallest project they'll even consider is something like 20 million, or I may be getting that wrong. But this looks to me like a perfect project for WIFIA. It stands for Water Innovation Financing. Anyway, if you meet state revolving fund loan criteria, then you meet WIFIA criteria. So anyway, it would be great before you bring this back to check that out, because I was sort of listening to this whole thing thinking this is a WIFIA project. So you need to start that process early. It's a big conversation with EPA, but it seems to, I don't want to get ahead of anybody, but it's exactly the kind of thing that falls directly into their, into that particular bucket.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, President Kohler, for that. I will definitely get into that.
Sure.
Okay, so we'll be bringing this back with a more detailed discussion on the cost, because really it comes down to the cost in making the selection for the preferred alternative.
Correct.
Exactly, Crystal. And like I say, if you look at this thing, it's all hinges on this 100-year life. And that's going to take a long discussion, I think, to whether that's really appropriate for an existing facility. Now we're talking about basically getting 160 years of life out of these tanks. Maybe, it's a long time, but I'm very happy that you pointed me to Appendix G. So I will spend some time with Appendix G before the doc meeting and satisfy myself as to where we are. I will say one thing: your cost estimate for the rehabilitation is basically equal to what I would normally use as a cost for 2 of these tanks, $2 a gallon. You're there on rehab. That seems like a lot. The hazardous materials issues seem to me they have to be dealt with anyway, whether it's disposed of or it's rehabbed. That's going to just a cost of doing business. So I don't think it's fair to burden one of the tests with something that doesn't happen across the board, basically washing it out of the project. And I think Cynthia has a great idea, and I would recommend that we put this on a schedule that allows all of that kind of evaluation to be done before, because I didn't see anything in your report that indicated, other than we should lower the water level, anything that indicated that it needed immediate attention. As I read the report, maybe I missed something, but that's what I saw. So if we lower the water level, we get around the sloshing problem, and then we just lose a little volume, but we keep on trucking. And then let's get all the dots, all the T's, all the I's. If we can get some kind of a special financing for it, and we need to build a new one, I don't know, Cynthia, if it applies to rehabs or it applies only to new. But if it applies and we need to make it new, then I would have put the reinforced concrete tanks in to begin with. So I'm all for the reinforced concrete tanks. The question is, what about what we already have invested in sitting up there? That's where my problem is.
I was just going to mention, I'm concerned about the bubbling of the coal tar and the PCBs. So,
but we're going to take that off. I mean, that's going to come off. It's going to go down to clean metal, Larry, and they're going to have to deal with the hazardous materials, whatever they are. It's still going to come off.
Right.
So, that kind of stuff it just needs to be done. I mean, the tanks have been inadequately maintained, and they didn't get cathodic protection until 2010. So it was, like 50 years after they were installed, we put cathodic protection in. That's a very long time to wait for cathodic protection. The technology existed, well before that time. In the 60s, tanks were being cathodically protected. So they could have put it in at any time. And the decision was made. Why? I have no idea. I was blown away by the fact that it was done in 2010. And I don't even remember the discussion in the board meeting in 2010, very frankly, about this issue. Maybe it wasn't brought to the board because I would have been shocked at that time. And I don't remember being shocked at all by the fact that it hadn't been done before.
Larry, no, the cathodic was installed in 1971. It was replaced and improved.
Okay. But even then, Crystal, they waited 11 years, huh?
Right, but that doesn't affect the coating that is failing, and that is toxic. So anyway, we'll get into it further. So I don't want to prolong the discussion.
Yeah, but like I say, that would come out
Yeah,
in the rehab.
good.
You got to take
Okay.
it, got to take it down to bare metal.
Good to hear. Mhm.
Okay.
Oh yeah, it's not going to stay.
I just want to be
No.
sure, we've been on this item a long time. I want to be sure we get to public comment. Do we have any public comments on this item?
There are no hands raised. Oh,
Okay,
I'm
great.
sorry. Actually, just one just did. Valerie Hood. Go ahead, Ms. Hood.
I just want to thank Larry Bragman for his comments. I completely agree with him on everything he said. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further comments.
Okay. Is there any further board comment on this? And Ben, do you have what you need from the board? It sounds like this is going to continue to unfold.
Yes, I think we did. I think it was a good discussion and we'll continue it at the next doc meeting.
Great. And I want to really thank the staff for putting together a very comprehensive report and moving this essential item forward. Okay. That brings us to our final item on the agenda, which is future items.
I have a future item I'd like to bring to the board's consideration, which is whether we should be considering putting in purple pipe in our street projects as they go forward. I'm really kind of bummed we missed the opportunity to do it on Drake, but there's going to be a major pipeline replacement on, I think, 3rd Street in San Rafael. So we, for a few years, were including in staff reports purple pipe opportunities. And I think given our drought situation and given the discussion we've been having about recycled water, the big expense, it seems, in recycled water is the distribution system. And it just seems like we should not be missing opportunities to put in purple pipe as we go forward on these major pipeline replacement projects in Central Marin.
Right.
So that is something I'd like us to take a look at if there's another board member that's interested in doing that.
Yeah, absolutely, Larry. Let me tell you that
I would like
discussion has been.
I'd like to see that bring together a list of pipelines that are in the works on the chart, so we would get some idea of how expansive we might be able to get with a project like that. I think it's a good idea.
Thanks a lot.
I'm sorry.
I do too. And in fact, I proposed previously that we run the purple pipe and just include it in the distribution system. Put the fresh water in it because it's laying there parallel to the other pipe, and just expand with 2 pipes. But I got 0 traction, I can tell you, on that discussion. So just be aware.
Okay, well, the times are changing, so I think we should
like the board is changing.
We should take a look, and I appreciate your encouragement. So
yes, it's a great idea. And as you said, it's a little bit like having the facilities dual plumb. If you don't get it when they're building it, it's never going to happen because they're not going to go back. And they'll whine and moan and groan about it. But the reality is the costs are fairly minimal because you just plumb it up to run the fresh water through it until the time comes to switch it over. And, it does cost money. But I remember there was a hotel proposed, on Sir Francis Drake, there's an empty lot that used to be part of the Ross Valley Sanitary District next to the shopping center. You have Price's auto place, and then you have a hill, and then an empty lot.
Right.
That used to be a sewage treatment plant.
Right.
And a hotel was planning to build there, and we got in a huge battle with them over dual plumbing, to the point that I finally said, well, how about this? How about the water district pays for the dual plumbing? And if you ever get reclaimed water, then you pay us back. That was the way, because their arguments were just irrational. They were going, it's going to kill us. And I'm sure you're aware, the shopping mart next door, the shopping center across from the ferry, is all dual plumbed. But we've never been able to bring reclaimed water to them. The water from CSMA is too salty to use directly, and was therefore not really a feasible alternative, although the district made them dual plumb when they built it.
Okay, well, given what we're going through now, I think it would be a good thing to take.
Great idea. Great idea.
Okay. Tara, do you want to go through for us the upcoming meetings?
Sure. So the board, there is no Finance and Administration Committee meeting this, actually it should be this Thursday, I apologize. So that's been canceled. And then the next regular board meeting is Tuesday, August 3rd. And then then right after that, August 17th, the next board meeting. And then of course, communications and water efficiency the next day. So that's it.
Refresh my memory. Why did we cancel the finance committee?
We canceled the finance committee because I believe the staff was working on the end of the year closures or finance. So they needed time to work on that. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I mean, finance is off calendar this week.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Right. And then don't forget, I still have tentative the board retreat October 18th, I believe, but we really need to finalize that, especially so if we can do that offline, that would be great.
I have a meeting.
Terry, we have the 10-year workshop. When is that scheduled for?
That is scheduled for 8 a.m. August 30th, and Monday, I believe.
What are the time parameters for the board retreat on the 18th?
It's 9 to 3.
Okay.
I'm still planning to go to Chicago on the 18th.
I've got a mediation on the 18th, and I'll send you an email. So.
Right. Okay.
Okay. I think we're there. Thanks, everybody. It was a long meeting, but I think we got a lot accomplished. So we'll let you get on with the rest of your evening. Take care. See you next time.
Okay. Take care. Bye, Jack.